Greetings and welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. As an extension of my Instagram page, Cerebral Women, this podcast offers insights into the visual art world. I interview artists, mainly artists of color and female artists who will freely articulate what inspires their creativity. In addition, you'll hear interesting perspectives from dedicated art professionals who work with artists and the art institutions that feature them. I'm confident that collectively, these individuals will indeed stimulate your mind as they do our eyes. Please know these interviews are conducted in my Manhattan apartment, so please forgive the background sounds of city life. Welcome to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. In this episode of the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast, I am pleased to feature Antwaun Sargent. He is a writer, curator, and director at Gagosian Gallery in New York City. He is the author of the new Black Vanguard, Photography Between Art and Fashion, published by Aperture in 2019. In addition, he's the editor of Young, Gifted, and Black, a new generation of artists, published by DAP in 2020, and in June of 2021. Antwaun was the guest editor of Art in America magazine's New Talent issue. His writings have appeared in the New York Times and New Yorker, and in museum and gallery publications for artists that include Mickalene Thomas, author Jafa, Nick Cave, and Ed Clarke, among many others. He has lectured and spoken in public forums at the Brooklyn Museum, the Student Museum of Harlem, Harvard University, and Yale University. He also gave a TEDx talk on the importance of Black art. Recently, Antwaun curated a group exhibition titled Social Works, The New Black Vanguard, and Young, Gifted, and Black, all currently on view. Thank you for tuning in to the Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast and enjoy this interesting and informative conversation with Antwaun Sargent. Antwaun, welcome to my Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. I am delighted to feature you.
Thanks for having me today.
When did you recognize your interest or love for the visual arts?
I grew up in Chicago and I had always been involved. As a kid, my mom, really thought that us being involved in sports, but also cultural activities were just very important for me and my siblings. And so I went to a private Catholic school that really just we were immersed in, not only sort of we played, fast pitch baseball and basketball sort of after school, but we also, went to Hubbard Street Dance and to the MCA Chicago and to the Art Institute of Chicago and the Field Museum and the Aquarium and the Chicago Youth Orchestra and all of, we were really sort of fortunate in that way. And so I think that is my sort of non-professional link to art has been I grew up in museums and always were around sort of creative people and, was a part of a group of young poets and writers and thinkers in Chicago that, they were all sort of officially attached to this organization called Young Chicago Authors. And I was just sort of around, observing and absorbing language and knowledge. And it's that's when I first met Theaster Gates, when I was a 16-year-old kid in Chicago, and, others as well, who were, artist teachers in our sort of, artist community. And so that sort of is the sort of origin story in a way. But I mean, I think when I thought about this as a career or as a sort of a professional possibility, I think that there are two things that happened. One, I went to Georgetown and I studied politics in the School of Foreign Service, and I was taking this theory class and we did these case studies. And one of the case studies was around Kara Walker's work, and it had blew my mind into 3 million pieces that work, because I think that up until that moment, I was educated in fairly fine schools, but the way that she sort of thought about history and probed history and showed the absolute messiness of history and sort of the antebellum period and the effects of that on our culture today. I had never seen anything like that. And I needed to know more. And so I just sort of threw myself into learning everything about Kara Walker. And when I graduated, I moved to New York, did Teach for America. I was a kindergarten teacher in East New York. And I sort of fell in a crowd of folks, Jafa being one of them, who was at the Guggenheim at the time. And, I saw that, she was sort of a digital strategist, and I had other friends who were young curators, and other friends who were like, doing other things. And I was like, oh, I can be a writer. I've always written. I can sort of contribute, to that. And so I was teaching in New York at, in public school system by day. And then by night, I was interviewing artists and writing about artists and seeing shows and going to parties and, the whole nine. And that sort of began the sort of career, my professional sort of career. And at the time, I must say, this was 12 years ago now, the landscape was very different. And so I was just like, oh, and then, I'm friends with all these young artists, Eric Mack and Awala Risku and Jordan Castile and, all of these folks. And I go, no one's writing about their work. I'll be the person to write about the work and interview them and sort of do that. And that just became the thing that I did for years and years.
Did you work much with children in art? Did you get a chance to impact how art influenced children?
No, not in school. I mean, not when I was teaching. When I was teaching, I was a literacy teacher. And so my responsibility was to make sure that my students in East New York, Brooklyn, could read. And I took that very seriously. And I just took, spent every moment, ensuring that that was something that they could do when they left my classroom and went off to the first grade and, et cetera. And so I was super involved in sort of the literacy component, because at the time I was solely a writer. And so that was sort of interest to me. It was like helping kids how to read. And then at night, contributing to, newspapers and magazines and then later, artist catalogs, and then make my own books.
What type of relationships do you prefer to have with artists?
I mean, I think that depending on the artist, each of the relationships are different. I even think about my own relationships. There's folks I've been in dialogue since, I was 21 and trying to make it, sort of make sense out of the art world. And those conversations have continued, and those conversations sort of have happened in the form of essays, in the forms of interviews, in the forms of studio visits, in the form of exhibitions, right? And so I think that being in conversation with an artist, I prefer whatever, those conversations sort of, the shape those conversations take, I prefer them to happen over time, because I am sort of someone who's deeply invested in sort of the arc of artist's creative journey, opposed to say just one show or one, sort of exhibition or one interview or one essay. I'm really sort of interested in sort of how do they grow? How do they change? What part of the culture are they responding to in a particular moment, or what part of our history, or what part of sort of, what materiality they're sort of interested in? All of those questions from the social to the formal happen over time in an artist's career, right? And I think that for me, that's important, to be on that journey over time, and, I can even, some of it even takes the form of just being at a gala or party or, supporting another friend, some of it is just simply friendship and listening, and then other times it's about sort of mounting an exhibition or writing an essay for a book that is connected to an exhibition.
What do you feel is the role of the artist?
I mean, I think the role of it's such a good question, because I think that's ever changing. And I think that there's not one particular role, I think that they just have to get to the truth of what they're doing, and I think that is the role. Really, whatever their concerns is to explore them deeply and as truthfully as possible.
Do you feel Black art can be defined?
No, I mean, I don't spend a lot of time trying to define Black art. I think that it's a useful term in that, we have particularly in sort of the way the art world has been created, and the way the histories of discrimination and the legacies of colonialism that runs through the art world. I think that it's important to sort of not only name a Black art, but also name a white art, right? And I think that that's important, but I think that it's not one thing. It's not a monolith, right? And so Black art is, Carrie James Marshall, Amy Sherrill, Jordan Castile, Awala Risku, Shakif, Tyler Mitchell, et cetera, et cetera. It's everybody, right? And I don't think that, like, if anyone tries to give you a definition, that shuts anybody out, I would be skeptical of that.
The art world has changed quite a bit. What are your thoughts on this new model?
My thing is, we're in the midst of a change. I don't know if we can say what the change is sort of my perspective. I think that it seems like we are in the middle of change, but, it took us, centuries to sort of get here, right? And so I think that, like, for me, a change would have to occur across not just, a few years, which is what we are in, but really sort of requires sort of decades, if not century-long commitments, right? And so I think that, like, there are a lot of seemingly interesting new possibilities that are cropping up, from where artists are represented, how they're represented, to sort of the types of, the emergence of things like digital possibilities for art and artists, the traditional galleries expanding, traditional museums sort of expanding their roles and their commitments. I think we're in a moment where a lot of that seems of promise, but we've been in other moments, right, where this have seemed very promising. And then in the, sort of in a blink of an eye, then it's back to sort of, the pendulum swings back to sort of what we've known as the status quo. And so for me, it really is about sort of trying to really, really, if we say change, always sort of like, what does that mean? What does that mean in this moment? What does this mean in the work that I'm doing? What does it mean in the essay? What does it mean in the role as a gallery director? What does it mean a role as sometimes as a museum curator? What does it mean when I'm in conversation with other curators or artists or cultural workers, right? I'm always sort of trying to sort of think about what is that change and how can you be that change? Always, constantly, right? And so I think that, but I am just sort of skeptical of folks. I'm skeptical of the idea that you now have a few of us in some very high places that equates to automatic change, right? And because I think that, like, the change is in the work and it's in the doing, it's not in the sort of hiring, right? Like, that's not the sort of thing that sort of, it's like, what do you do with the position that matters ultimately? So I'm just sort of sitting back and watching. I mean, there's some interesting things happening and some not so interesting things happening, right? That is also change, right? And so so I'm sort of trying to sort of do my part, but also think about sort of what that might mean. I think we're in this sort of moment of total expansion in all these different ways, in terms of, like, what artists want, where artists want to be, sort of have their practices go, right? That is even sort of shifting. It's not just like, hey, you do this one thing, right? It's not like you're a painter and you paint. Now painters are making films and they're making comic books and they're making, you know what I mean? Like, there's sort of the nature of an artist's practice has shifted so dramatically. And I hope that, our art world or art worlds can sort of hold and harness that shift, which is yet to be seen.
How do you think we can best sustain these positive steps that we've taken?
We need to increase the momentum by like 100-fold, right? Because, like, even when you sort of say a museum collected a work by a artist of color or a Black artist or a woman artist or, so have you, their budgets are still 90, 85, 90% like traditional, And so, like, when you say, just because, I guess I'm sort of pushing back against the idea that just because you're sort of, there's one artist being shown or that there's one exhibition being mounted, that's one among the many more that are sort of that are still in the tradition, right? That we all find problematic, right? And so I think that, like, there just needs to be a lot more of it. There needs to be a lot more pushing. There needs to be a lot more sort of change, if you will. Because at the moment, I don't think that we're not moving at a pace that will really create long-lasting results.
Galleries aren't always fair in terms of who or what collectors they sell to. I'd like to see more Black collectors buy work, but there are certain, impediments, certain blocks. Can you comment on what you feel would be the ideal scenario?
I mean, I don't think there is an ideal scenario. I think that each artist, I mean, I can sort of speak from the perspective of the work that I've been doing at the gallery that I work at. We sort of are a artist-led organization, and artists are involved in every decision that we make, you know, and that might not seem like the result might not seem fair, but that is sort of our impetus in how we sort of approach things. I think that there's a number of really, whenever you're trying to place a work, there's a number of really complicated decisions that you're making about where work ultimately ends up, right? And so on the one hand, I'm like, yes, more Black collectors need opportunities to collect work, sure. But also we just need more Black collectors, right? And I think we need more Black collectors who are willing to sort of collect in ways that also are, we need more collectors in general that are willing to collect in ways that sort of also meet whatever artist's goal is, right? And so, for example, what I mean by that, sometimes an artist who only wants things to go to people that have institutional affiliations, right? And to sort of be in the institutional game, there are just not a lot of Black collectors in that game right now, right? And we can talk about sort of for whatever reasons, right? One just being like the historic lockout of Black people in sort of galleries and museums and on boards and all of that stuff, right? Efforts that are underway to rectify, right? Being rectified, right? But if an artist says, you know, if there's a high demand for an artist and say a collector, this is hypothetical, but say a collector says, I sit on the board of a museum and, you know, I've been talking to folks in the museum and they're really excited about this artist, right? And so when the time comes and if the museum likes something, then I'll help facilitate that. I'll help make the donation or whatever, right? I'll help make it possible. That's a pretty good deal for an artist. I'm not saying that Black collectors don't do that because they very much do, but I'm saying that there are all of these random sort of things that are happening behind the scenes that sort of allow certain people to get work and others not to get work, you know? And I've now just seen that up close in the work that I'm doing at the gallery, right? I also think that, you know, there are, like, I know a lot of collectors, Black collectors, who actually have a lot of the work that are now prized by Black artists, for example, you know, that other collectors want and cannot get, white collectors want and cannot get, right? Because they went early and they had commitments, right? I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios. You know, there's scenarios where you present something to a collector, Black or white, and for whatever reason, they can't make the commitment. And then when they are able to make a commitment, you have other things, you know? Like, I don't think that, like, I think that you have other, I'm not trying to be opaque, but I'm just saying that there's other, you know, like maybe the artist list has grown and then you have several institutions who want work. And so that's not a Black collector not being able to get work. It's just that, like, you're not the priority. You know what I mean? And then I think that, like, that is one of the things that's sort of been interesting is that, like, these are not one single scenario and it's not one single, you know, thing. But I think that there's a lot of different things that play into that. You know, when some folks want discounts, others don't need them, you know, that sort of just shapes what is possible. I'm not saying Black folks want discounts all the time. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying white folks want discounts all the time. I'm just saying that there's all these sort of other these other sort of things that happen behind the scenes that allow folks to get access and other folks not to get access, you know, or it allows one type of maybe say Black collector to get a lot of access and then one not to get any at all, right? And then there's this thing which has been sort of interesting, is that when you're first starting collecting, right? Like Black or white or whatever, but like it's almost impossible to get access to the best work. And I don't care how much money you have, because one of the questions that artists are interested in and that galleries are, if they're doing their job right, are interested in is what's in your collection. And so if you don't have anything in your collection, then how do you get in? So there are these other sort of issues, I think, out there as well around sort of what you think you should have access to versus what you do have access to. And the best collectors that I've seen over the years have sort of started with their own interest and started by taking risks. As an example, it's like not everyone, if you're just sort of starting out, I don't know if you're going to get the opportunity to buy a Carrie James Marshall. I don't know if you should have the opportunity, frankly, to buy a Carrie James Marshall if you're just starting out. Because this is we are sort of among a community, right, that has some level of supports and rules and, you know, and protections. They're not perfect, obviously. But I think that expectation versus sort of what is possible, it's not always racism, some of it is, absolutely. But I think now being in this job on this side of on this side of it, having the place works, having to sort of field requests, it's sort of been really eye-opening around sort of what people are willing to pay, what, like all of these things, right? Like, I think that and I'm sort of twisting myself into a pretzel because I'm not trying to generalize any one experience because there's not one experience, right? And so when you say something like, you think Black collectors should have more access, yes, we can all agree on that. But then when it comes to, I can tell, it's like I've offered, there was a show I had early this summer. I offered the works intentionally to a number of Black collectors, and they passed on those works. And then things happened, the show was successful. A lot of them came back and said, hey, I would like, access to those works. And so I go, well, the works are gone. That's not me holding them out. That's me saying, you snoozed, you lost, and now you have to get in fucking line. And I think that that is also the other thing. It's like, it's not a one-way street. Support of an artist goes way beyond just buying the work. And I think that is what is one of the fundamental sort of, in this moment, one of the fundamental misalignments between being a collector and being a patron, for example. Like when I'm sort of placing works with people, I'm placing works with people who are patrons, who have the possibility to sort of help the artist, not just sort of in this moment of like, we want a painting, but if they have if they are sort of doing stay, I work with a lot of artists who are communally engaged, for example. Are you going to be there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when my artists need to do something? Are you going to sort of help the artist in LA who's trying to feed her community? I'm not saying those are prerequisites, but I'm saying when people are just sort of showing up offering those things, you're not competing, and so I think that like those are sort of like, there are all of these other factors that I think are important right now. And then there's the historical factors, right? That yes, there is some Black collectors who just couldn't get access. And there's still Black collectors who can't get access. And that's a problem that needs to be rectified. But I know that for me, one of the things of trying to do things differently in the role that I have at the gallery that I am at is, making sure that a lot of different people have possibilities. And so when I did social works, the two shows that I've done at the gallery, I made sure that a diverse group of collectors, and I don't mean diverse just racially, I mean age, I mean where they live geographically, I wanted sort of a diverse group of people to have sort of access because there was an intergenerational show. You had artists who were just starting out, and you had artists who were extremely established with very healthy markets. And so you wanted to make sure that you were sort of, trying to, as best you can, because none of this is a science, right? But you were trying as best you can to sort of try to encourage certain people who I know, Black folks who I know who have money that should be collecting, encouraging them to buy art by maybe offering them something that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. And then it was also sort of on the other end where you had these really established collectors, Black collectors with, really storied collections, right? With institutional ties or whatever, and encouraging them to maybe collect a younger artist that, that probably wasn't on their radar, right? And so you're trying to do all of that work, but then you're also trying to do all that work, not in a vacuum, you're trying to do all that work with the other sort of concerns, I think that the artists that I work with, they want their work collected by a wide range of folks, and not just by one demographic or what have you, or one, type of collector. And so that's been something I've been trying to sort of work through, and trying to be as, I don't know if fair is the right word in this sort of art world, but it's something I've been very cognizant of and trying to my best to make sure that a lot of different had a possibility to sort of acquire their work. But if I offered you something and you passed on it, then fine, whatever the situation, but don't think that you're going to be offered that thing again. That's just not the way that we all know that's not how this works, Not saying that, and maybe there is a possibility down in, the line in the future that you are offered something else, but it's not I don't know. I think I've been shocked in some ways by the collecting side and how all the politics around the collecting side and how that narrative isn't necessarily the one that is most affecting what collectors get access to what work, You also have folks who does a lot of business with a gallery. And they are just prioritized because they do a lot of business with the gallery, right? And so they're not supporting just one show, one artist, they're supporting many shows and many artists, right? At the end of the day, it's a business, right? And so I think that like in any other, business, you make sure that your best customers are taken care of, right? Or your best collectors in this case, right? And so I think there's a lot of, and then I work at a global gallery with a lot of, that reaches a lot of people, a lot of parts of the world. And so that's also the other thing. I think that one of my big sort of takeaways of the last, say, a few years is that this is a very American conversation we're having around Black artists, right? And you go to other parts of the world and it's like, we don't exist, or our work isn't known, and so for me, that means that, okay, I work at a gallery with 18 locations around the world. Let's get these names out there, let's sort of think about sort of different markets. Let's think about sort of bringing our art and our concerns to different places, right? And sometimes that means that then those people in those markets get access first, because you're trying to have not just the sort of American conversation, you're trying to sort of have a global conversation, or at least I am. And so I think those things are also at play now. It's not just, the days of like a few people supporting few artists, Black artists in the gallery space. It's fair to say those days are over.
Should new collectors look to the secondary market if they're not able to buy from a gallery during the exhibition?
Yeah, I mean, sure, like absolutely. I've known some Black collectors, newer Black collectors who've gotten some really great work on the secondary market, right? And the secondary market is, it is not, there's like no one way to sort of look at it, right? And so like, I think that like there have been these high profile cases where artists have felt that they had been wrong because their work went on secondary, right? And I think that has to do with sort of like artists' royalties and things like that, right? Which is not a thing in the United States, right? I mean, I don't know. Like my perspective on the one hand, it's like, yes, you should, like, I think what's tough about it is like you sell them for $1 million, right? The painting for $1 million. I'm like, sort of like, it's no longer yours, like you said, you are an active player. I know it's a controversial sort of out of step perspective, but I really do think that like a lot of these folks who are works are going on the secondary market, they're pretty rich. It's sort of like my my perspective, and that I don't know if I'm gonna sort of I don't know if that's my fight. Like I think that people should seek access where they can. And I think that I also believe in artist royalties, but I also believe that a healthy secondary market actually help living artists. Like that totally help the value of the work. Not maybe to the point that people want to see it or whatever, or what have you. And I understand that, but it definitely is a positive if you have a healthy secondary market.
What exhibitions are you excited about now?
What exhibitions at the moment? You mean are currently up?
Yes. Or even something you saw down in Basel.
For the next week, I have a Social Works 2 open in London that I'm was very excited about putting that show on. At the Detroit Institute of Art, I have an exhibition called The New Black Vanguard, photography between art and fashion. That's opening on December 17th. That's going to run through the spring. Shows that that are not my own that I'm interested in. At the Whitney, there's a beautiful Jennifer Packer exhibition. Let's see, Dirty South, that's traveling at the moment. It's in Houston. I'm really excited to get to see that. I've been really fascinated by the traveling Obama show, just because in each city that is traveled to, it sort of contextualizes portraits by Kehinde and Amy in different ways. What else am I interested in? I was just out in LA and I saw a photo show at LACMA that was really sort of, I think, well done. What else am I sort of interested in at the moment? I know there's just like so many exhibitions. At the New Museum, the Triennial, it's like really interesting because it defies sort of all the market sort of, trends that we are seeing coming up. I'm really interested that the Whitney Biennial is coming back in the spring. I think it opens in late March, early April. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot happening. I mean, there's a lot. The days of like one Black artist getting one show at an institution or at a gallery are over, And so it really is. People are doing like all types of sort of really, really exciting things. Oh, there's a Lubiana Hamid show at the moment. Hamid show at the Tate. And she's having, it's like her survey. I need to get over to London to see that. I saw Lynette's show at the Tate right before it was closing. It's coming back to the Tate because it didn't run for so long. There's just a lot sort of happening. And I'm sort of just excited about sort of, I'm constantly seeing exhibitions. It's like an addiction. But I think those are the shows that I've seen recently that are just really great. Oh, Glenn Ligon at Hausenwerth in New York. And also, sort of coincidentally, Lorna Simpson at Hausenwerth at Los Angeles. That show is sublime. I've not seen someone occupy. That's a tough space. That gallery is a tough gallery to mount exhibitions in my humble opinion. And she did a really great job with that work. And the way that she sort of start to push her practice, and she returns to sort of some themes that, in earlier works, I really do think that's a really, really sort of poetic and beautiful exhibition out there.
Well, thanks for sharing. And it's so exciting. It's just so exciting right now. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate your time. This is going to be the last question. What lasting impact do you want to have on the art world?
Lasting impact. My lasting impact is that I gave artists platforms to express themselves and create. That's sort of the impact that I want to have. There's almost nothing to do with like opening doors or being the first to do this or that. It really is about sort of, I think what brought me to the art world was just, I was so fascinated by the ways that artists were thinking about the world that we live in extremely creative ways that defy policy, that defy our imaginations, defy sort of what we think is possible. And I think in being able to be a part of that process, whether that's in writing or exhibition making, it's just really been an honor for me. I've grown a lot. I've changed a lot because of the artists I have grown to know, because of the curators and cultural workers. And so I hope that I continue to get to do this work on the stages that have been granted to me.
I share the same passions and very much appreciate all my interactions and everything I've learned from artists and talking to people like you.
There's nothing like them, it really, nothing like them. In all the ways, the good, the bad, the extraordinary. There's nothing like them. There's also a Khalil Irving show that's opening at MoMA that I can't wait to see. That Legacy Russell curated.
Thank you for that. And once again, it's great. I'm glad I had an opportunity to feature you. It's important. Your voice is important.
Thank you so much. And I thank you for making the time right before Christmas.
Enjoy the holidays.
Okay, you too.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.